It was a Friday evening, and we were all at the dinner table. I was visiting my best friend Ethan, like I had done countless times since we were kids. His parents had always been warm and welcoming, treating me like family. Ethan was adopted. He's black, and his parents are white. I never thought much of it growing up. Ethan was just Ethan, but something shifted that night, and it was so sharp and ugly. I still feel it whenever I think back. Dinner started off normal enough. We were laughing, talking about school, and joking about how Ethan was always the slowest to finish his plate. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, Ethan's parents, were proud people, strict but fair. They raised Ethan no different than their two biological kids, Emily and Josh. At least, that's how it always seemed to me. Then the doorbell rang. Mr. Carter got up to answer it. A couple of minutes later, he came back into the dining room with two police officers. Their faces were stern, and one of them was holding a clipboard. "We're here regarding Ethan," one of the officers said. The air in the room went cold. Ethan froze mid-bite, his fork halfway to his mouth. Mrs. Carter's hand flew to her chest. "What's this about?" Mr. Carter asked, his voice steady but tense. "We received a report of a suspected theft at the electronics store down on Maple Street," the officer said. A witness described the suspect as a young black male wearing a red hoodie. I looked over at Ethan. My stomach dropped. He was wearing his favorite red hoodie. "That's ridiculous, Mrs. Carter said, standing up. "Ethan's been home all evening. He hasn't gone anywhere." "That's true," Emily piped in. "We've all been here." Ethan didn't say anything. He just sat there staring at his plate, his hands clenched into fists on the table. I wanted to speak up, to say something, but I didn't know what to say. The officers didn't look convinced. They asked Ethan to step outside so they could ask him a few questions. I'll never forget the way Mrs. Carter hesitated. She looked at Ethan, then at the officers, and then back at Ethan again. It was like for a split second she was wondering if it could be true. Ethan stood up slowly, his movement stiff, like he was trying to hold himself together. Mr. Carter went with him to the porch, through the window. I could see Ethan shaking his head as he spoke to the officers, his hands gesturing wildly. Mr. Carter had his arms crossed, his face unreadable. When they came back inside, Ethan looked like he'd been hit by a truck. He sat back down, but he didn't touch his food. The officers left after apologizing for the misunderstanding. But the damage was done. Something invisible but heavy lingered in the room. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I found Ethan sitting on the back porch. Staring at the stars, I sat down next to him, not knowing what to say. Finally, he broke the silence. "They didn't believe me," he said quietly. His voice was so hollow it hurt to hear. "Not at first?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. He nodded when the cop said it was a black kid. They looked at me like I was a stranger, like I was someone they couldn't trust. I didn't know what to say. How do you comfort someone after that? We sat there in silence until he finally got up and went inside. Things weren't the same after that. It was subtle at first, Mrs. Carter asking more questions about where Ethan was going and who he was with Mr. Carter being quicker to lose his temper when Ethan messed up. Ethan started spending more time in his room, avoiding family dinners and movie nights. One night, months later, Ethan told me he overheard Mrs. Carter talking to Mr. Carter in the kitchen. She was whispering, but her words cut deep. "I just don't know if we did the right thing adopting him. What if we can't give him what he needs? What if we're not enough?" Ethan moved out the day he turned 18. He barely said goodbye. I tried to keep in touch, but he kept his distance, like he didn't want any reminders of the life he was leaving behind. I'll never forget the way he looked at me that last time I saw him. It was a mix of sadness, anger, and something else, something like resignation, like he'd already accepted that the world would never really see him for who he was, not even the people who were supposed to love him the most. And the worst part? I didn't know how to make it right. Years passed, and I didn't hear much from Ethan. He stayed off social media, rarely responded to texts, and only sent the occasional "I'm good" if I pressed him. I hated how distant he had become, but I understood. His world had been shaken in a way that mine hadn't. Then, one day, out of nowhere, I got a call from Ethan. At first, I thought it was a pocket dial. I answered with a hesitant hello, but all I heard on the other end was his uneven breathing. "Ethan," I said, sitting up straight. "I need your help," he said, his voice trembling. My heart sank. "What's going on? Are you okay?" "It's bad," he whispered. "I don't know who else to call." Within an hour, I was at his apartment. He opened the door and I barely recognized him. His eyes were red and swollen, like he'd been crying for days. His usually neat hair was unkempt and his clothes hung loosely on his frame, like he hadn't eaten properly in weeks. He stepped aside to let me in, and I saw what he meant by bad. His living room was a mess of papers, open boxes, and trash bags filled with what looked like his belongings. "I lost my job," he said, sitting down on the edge of the couch. "And now the landlord's kicking me out. What happened?" I asked, still trying to process everything. "They said I had an attitude problem," he scoffed. Shaking his head, I was the only black employee in the office. The only one who ever got pulled into talks about my behavior. The only one whose work was picked apart over nothing. I didn't know what to say. He buried his face in his hands, and I could see his shoulders shaking. "I've been trying so hard," he choked out. "So damn hard to make something of myself, to prove I'm not." He stopped. Unable to finish the sentence. "To prove you're not what?" I asked gently. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a pain I couldn't fully comprehend. "Not what they see me as. A threat, a failure, a mistake." I sat down next to him. "Ethan, you're none of those things." He gave a bitter laugh. "Tell that to them." We spent the next few hours packing up his stuff. He didn't have much, just the basics, a few clothes, books, and a couple of photo albums. One of the albums caught my eye. It was filled with pictures from his childhood. There was a photo of him with the Carters on the day they brought him home. Another of him holding up a soccer trophy, smiling proudly with Mr. Carter standing beside him. "Do you ever talk to them?" I asked, glancing at him. He shook his head. "No point." "I haven't seen them since I left. They're still your family." "Ethan," I said cautiously, unsure how he'd react. He stared at the photo for a long moment before closing the album and tossing it into a box. "Family doesn't make you feel like you don't belong." We loaded his things into my car, and I offered to let him crash at my place for as long as he needed. He hesitated but eventually agreed. Over the next few weeks, I helped him job hunt, driving him to interviews and editing his resume. He got rejected a lot, but he kept pushing. Determined to find something, one night, after another long day of searching, we were sitting in my living room when he got quiet. He looked at me and said, "Do you ever feel like you're fighting a war you didn't sign up for?" "What do you mean?" I asked. He leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. "Everywhere I go, it's like I have to prove myself twice as hard to strangers. To co-workers, to landlords, even to the people who were supposed to be my parents. And no matter what I do, it's never enough." I didn't know how to respond, so I just sat there listening. "I keep thinking about something, Mr. Carter said to me before I left." Ethan continued. "We took you in to give you a better life, don't waste it. Like I was some project they could fix. Like I owed them for existing, Ethan, you don't owe anyone?" I said firmly. "Not them, not anyone." He nodded slowly, but I could tell he didn't fully believe me. A few months later, Ethan finally landed a job working at a nonprofit that helped underprivileged kids. He poured himself into the work, mentoring kids who were dealing with challenges he understood all too well. For the first time in a long time, I saw a spark of hope in his eyes one day, out of the blue. He told me he'd written a letter to the Carters. "What did you say?" I asked, surprised. I told them how I felt, he said. How much it hurt when they didn't stand up for me, when they doubted me. But I also told them I'm grateful they gave me a home. Even if it wasn't perfect. I don't know if they'll ever respond. But I needed to say it. Weeks passed, then months. And Ethan didn't hear back. He told me he wasn't surprised. But I could see the disappointment in his eyes. One night after we got home from a long day of work, there was a letter waiting for Ethan in the mail. It was from Mrs. Carter. He opened it slowly, his hands trembling as he read it. Tears streamed down his face. She apologized, he whispered. She said she didn't realize how much pain she caused me. She said she wants to meet. "Are you going to?" I asked. He stared at the letter for a long time before finally nodding. "Yeah, I think I am." A week later, he met with them. He told me afterward it wasn't perfect. There were still things that couldn't be undone, wounds that couldn't fully heal. But for the first time, they listened, really listened. And maybe that was a start. Ethan came back from the meeting quieter than usual. He sat down on my couch, fiddling with the edges of the letter Mrs. Carter had sent him. I didn't press him right away. I knew he'd speak when he was ready. After a long silence, he finally said, "It wasn't what I expected, good or bad?" I asked cautiously. "Both," he said with a faint shrug. "They apologized, but it's complicated." I leaned forward. waiting for him to unpack it. They said they've been thinking about me a lot, especially Mom, Mrs. Carter. He corrected himself, almost out of habit. She cried when she saw me, told me they made mistakes they can never take back. She said she didn't realize how much I felt like an outsider in the house. But looking back, she said it made sense, all the little ways they treated me differently. She admitted it. Wow, I said softly. That takes a lot to say, yeah, Ethan said, staring at the floor. But then Dad missed her. Carter, he wasn't as open. He apologized too. But it felt more hollow, you know? Like he was saying what he thought I wanted to hear. Not what he actually believed. I didn't say anything. I could see in Ethan's face that he wasn't finished. I think he resents me, Ethan said after a long pause. Like adopting me wasn't what he thought it would be, and now he looks back on it as a mistake. That's not on you, Ethan, I said firmly. He let out a shaky laugh, I know, but it still feels like it is. Ethan rubbed his hands over his face, trying to push back the emotions. Mom, Mrs. Carter, she wants to rebuild. She said she wants me to meet Emily and Josh again, have a family dinner. But how can I go back and pretend everything's fine? It won't ever be. It doesn't have to be fine right away, I said. Or ever, really. Maybe rebuilding doesn't mean it'll be perfect. Maybe it's just about finding something good to hold on to. He sat with that for a while, nodding slowly but not entirely convinced. A couple of weeks later, Ethan agreed to go to that family dinner. He was nervous, and I don't blame him. He asked me to drop him off, just in case it gets too heavy and I need a quick exit. He joked, though we both knew he wasn't entirely kidding. When I picked him up that night, he looked drained but also lighter. It was weird. He admitted as he climbed into my car, but it wasn't terrible. How so? Well, he began, Emily and Josh were there, and they were happy to see me. I could tell they didn't really know what to say, though there was a lot of awkward small talk. A lot of tiptoeing around, everything. But they were trying, and your parents? I asked. Mom wouldn't stop fussing over me, he said. Rolling his eyes with a small smile, she kept asking if I was eating enough. If I had everything I needed, like I was 10 again. I guess that's her way of making up for lost time. And your dad? Ethan's expression grew more serious. He's trying, I think, but it's like there's this wall between us. He still talks to me like I'm a guest in his house. Not his son. I don't know if that'll ever change. We drove in silence for a while before he spoke again, but it wasn't all bad. There were these moments where it felt real, like when Emily started teasing me about my old soccer skills, and Josh chimed in, saying I could never beat him in a race for a second. It felt like I was just part of the family again. And how do you feel about that? I asked. I don't know, he admitted. I'm not sure if I can ever trust them completely again, but maybe that's okay. Maybe rebuilding doesn't mean things go back to how they were. Maybe it just means starting from where we are over the next year. Ethan kept in touch with the Carters slowly, cautiously. He didn't dive back in like nothing had happened. He set boundaries and kept his guard up. And even though some days were hard and frustrating, he found small moments of healing. One day, Ethan told me he'd been invited to Emily's wedding. At first, he wasn't sure if he'd go, worried about being thrust back into the center of a family he still wasn't sure he belonged in. But in the end, he decided to attend. I'm going because I want to, he told me. Not because I feel obligated, that's the difference. When he came back from the wedding, he looked more at peace than I'd seen him in years. Seeing them all again, it just reminded me that life is messy. He said, relationships are messy, but maybe it's not about having the perfect family. Maybe it's about showing up and trying, even when it's hard. From then on, Ethan kept building a life he was proud of, not defined by his past, but not running from it either. And even though things with the Carters weren't perfect, they were trying, and maybe that was enough. Years went by, and Ethan slowly rebuilt a version of family with the Carters, not the kind of family you see in pictures or perfect TV commercials, but one that felt more real, more honest. He set boundaries where he needed to, but allowed himself to show up for the parts that mattered. Emily's wedding, Sunday phone calls with Mrs. Carter, even an occasional barbecue at the old house. It was small, deliberate steps. But Ethan never forgot those years of silence. The moments that cracked the foundation of their trust. He forgave them enough to move forward, but not enough to let those wounds fully close. Over one day, he asked me, "Do you think forgiveness is supposed to make you feel lighter?" "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe it's just supposed to make it easier to carry things." Ethan smiled faintly, not disagreeing, but not entirely satisfied either. Then, About 10 years after that night at the dinner table with the police, Ethan called me again. His voice was heavier than I had heard it in years, like something large and final hung over him. "My mom, Mrs. Carter, she's in the hospital," he said, pausing to gather his words. "It's bad. They don't think she has much time left." I offered to drive him to the hospital, and he accepted. When we got there, the rest of the Carters were already gathered in her room. Ethan looked hesitant as we walked in, like he was crossing some invisible line between the past and the present. But when Mrs. Carter saw him, her face lit up, and she reached out weakly with one hand. "Ethan," she whispered, "you came." He sat beside her, gently taking her hand in his. She looked so small and frail. Nothing like the confident woman I remembered from our teenage years, but her eyes were clear, and they stayed fixed on Ethan, like he was the only one in the room. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "for all of it. For the way we failed you. You don't have to say that," Ethan said quietly, though his voice cracked. "I do," she insisted, gripping his hand with surprising strength. "You deserved better from us, from me." Ethan didn't respond right away. He sat there holding her hand, tears streaming down his face. Finally, he said, "You tried, and for that I'm grateful." After Mrs. Carter passed, the family gathered at the old house to sort through her belongings. Ethan was hesitant to go, afraid of old memories, old feelings, but he went anyway. I came along for support, though I hung back, giving him space to navigate it with the Carters. As they sorted through photo albums, letters, and keepsakes, Emily pulled out a box labeled Ethan. Inside were clippings from his soccer games, drawings he made as a kid, and letters he wrote to Santa. But there was also something else, a letter in Mrs. Carter's handwriting, tucked in an envelope marked "To Ethan." "For when you're ready." Ethan hesitated before opening it, and we all stepped back to give him privacy. Later, he showed it to me. In the letter, Mrs. Carter apologized again for the mistakes she and Mr. Carter had made, for their failure to fully protect him, and for the ways they let their own biases blind them. "But Ethan," the letter read, "you taught me what love looks like, not the easy, picture-perfect kind, but the hard, messy, beautiful kind that makes you face your own flaws. Thank you for letting me be your mom, even when I didn't deserve it. I hope you'll remember me for the times I got it right." After reading the letter, Ethan sat quietly for a long time. When he finally spoke, he said, "Maybe forgiveness isn't just about what it does for you. Maybe it's about what it gives the other person, too." Ethan and the Carters continued to find a way forward. Even without Mrs. Carter, he and Mr. Carter never fully closed the gap between them. But they found moments of connection in small ways, fixing things around the house together, sharing stories about Mrs. Carter, laughing over a shared memory of Ethan's younger years. One night, Ethan told me, "It's weird, I always thought closure was this big moment. Like everything suddenly makes sense, and you feel whole again. But I think it's just the small stuff showing up, listening, letting time do its thing." He paused, then smiled. "It's not perfect, but maybe it doesn't have to be by then." Ethan had built a life he was proud of. He kept working with the nonprofit, mentoring kids and helping them navigate challenges he understood deeply. He started traveling, exploring places he'd only read about as a kid, and slowly, he built a circle of people who saw him for who he truly was, not as a project, not as a symbol, but as Ethan. Every once in a while, he'd still visit the Carters, and every time he did, he made a quiet peace with the pieces of his past. Because life, as Ethan would often say, isn't about erasing the hard parts. It's about learning how to carry them and still move forward.